She had known me since I was a boy, but the night she leaned close and whispered, "Careful, you're not a kid anymore," I realized nothing between us would ever feel the same again. I never really thought much about her when I was younger. She was just there. A familiar presence who floated in and out of our house, laughing with my mom in the kitchen, leaving behind the faint scent of perfume and the echo of stories I was too young to care about. To me, she was simply my mom's friend. But coming home that weekend, after months of being away at school, something felt different. Or maybe it wasn't her that had changed. Maybe it was me. The first time I saw her again, she was leaning against the kitchen counter, coffee mug in hand, listening to my mom with that patient smile she always carried. The late afternoon sun poured in through the window, brushing her hair with gold, and I found myself looking longer than I should have. There was something in the curve of her smile, warm, but tinged with a kind of tiredness, that caught me. She laughed at something my mom said, tilting her head slightly, and I realized how much attention I was paying to the small things. The way she held her mug with both hands, the faint line at the corner of her eye that deepened when she smiled, the quiet elegance in how she stood. I remembered being 15 and barely noticing her beyond whether she brought cookies or not. But now, at 22, I couldn't ignore her presence. She wasn't just mom's friend anymore. She was a woman I suddenly wanted to understand. I tried to shake the thought off as we all sat down. She asked me about school, about how I was managing. Her tone was light, casual, but I could feel her studying me in a way I hadn't noticed before. Her eyes lingered, as if she, too, was quietly comparing the boy she remembered with the man now sitting in front of her. Her voice carried warmth, but there was a softness beneath it, something unspoken. And when I answered, I found myself trying harder than usual to sound composed, even confident. It wasn't about impressing my mom. It was about her. The conversation drifted easily, like it always had, but my awareness of her presence never dimmed. The way her hair fell over her shoulder, the gentle rhythm of her laugh, even the faint trace of her perfume that seemed to weave through the air every time she leaned closer. For the first time in years, I realized I wasn't just listening to her words. I was listening to her, and as she caught me looking at her, just for a second, before she turned her gaze back to my mom, I felt something stir, something I hadn't expected, and something I wasn't sure I should even be feeling. That evening, sitting in the kitchen I'd known my whole life, I realized that nothing about her seemed ordinary anymore. She was familiar, but suddenly, she felt like a stranger I wanted to know all over again. The next day passed in a blur of family chatter and routine. But even as I moved through it all, my awareness of her never dimmed. Every time she spoke, my ears tuned in. Every time she laughed, I caught myself smiling without meaning to. That afternoon, I found her in the living room, standing on tiptoe as she tried to reach a book from the top shelf. The scene would have been ordinary if not for how my chest tightened at the sight of her, graceful, but struggling against the limits of her reach. "Here, let me," I said quickly, stepping forward before I could think twice. She glanced over her shoulder, half laughing. "You're taller now. I suppose I should take advantage of that." I smiled, sliding the book down easily and handing it to her. Our fingers brushed as she took it, and this time the touch didn't feel accidental. Her hand lingered a second longer than it needed to, warm against my skin. "Thanks," she murmured, her eyes flicking up to meet mine. It wasn't the words that caught me. It was the way her voice dipped softer, like gratitude mixed with hesitation. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. I wanted to hold onto her hand, to see if she'd let me, but she pulled away gently, hugging the book to her chest. The air between us felt suddenly heavier, filled with everything neither of us was saying. Later, while my mom napped upstairs, I found myself helping her again, this time fixing a loose cabinet door in the kitchen. She knelt beside me as I tightened the hinge, watching with quiet interest. The space between us was small, our shoulders nearly touching. "You've gotten good at this," she said softly. "Handy. Guess I've had to grow up a little," I replied, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Her smile faltered just slightly, like the phrase had hit her in a place she wasn't expecting. She reached out, almost absent-mindedly, and laid her hand on my arm. The gesture was so light it could have been nothing, but it wasn't. Her touch was warm, grounding. Yet there was something fragile in it too, as if she were testing a line, wondering if she should cross it. I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time I noticed the faint worry etched in her expression. It was as though she wanted to say something but stopped herself, retreating into silence. She pulled her hand back, but the impression of it stayed with me long after. My skin still hummed where she'd touched, and my thoughts spiraled with questions I didn't dare ask. That night, as I lay in bed, I kept replaying those tiny moments. The brush of her fingers, the weight of her hand on my arm, the hesitation in her eyes. Small gestures, yet they carried more meaning than entire conversations. And though I didn't know it then, those little touches were already changing everything. Later that evening, the house felt smaller than usual. My mom had gone upstairs to take a call, leaving just the two of us in the living room. The television hummed faintly in the background, some old sitcom rerun, but neither of us was really paying attention. She stood up first, gathering empty glasses from the coffee table. I offered to help without thinking, following her into the kitchen. The quiet between us wasn't uncomfortable, but it was charged, somehow. Every sound, the clink of glass against the sink, the low hum of the refrigerator, seemed sharper, as if the air itself had shifted. "Can you grab that bag for me?" she asked, pointing toward the counter where groceries were still waiting to be put away. I nodded, stepping closer. Our hands nearly brushed as I passed her the bag, and though it was nothing, just a simple movement, it sent a quick flicker of heat through me. She noticed it too. I could tell by the way her breath caught, so softly I almost thought I imagined it. We ended up stepping outside together, carrying the last of the bags to the porch. The evening air was cool, the kind that makes your skin tighten just enough to notice when someone else's warmth is near. The street was quiet, the faint sound of a dog barking in the distance, and for a moment, it felt like the world had shrunk down to just her and me. I tried to play it casual, making a light joke about how my mom always overbuys groceries. She laughed, shaking her head, but when her eyes met mine, there was something different in them. Amusement, yes, but also an awareness I hadn't seen before. "You know," she began, setting down one of the bags slowly, "I still remember when you used to run around this porch barefoot, always leaving muddy footprints." I chuckled, rubbing the back of my neck. "Yeah, I was a little reckless back then." She tilted her head, studying me. "Not just reckless. Young." Her voice softened, her gaze lingering in a way that made my chest tighten. Then she added, almost under her breath, "Careful. You're not a kid anymore." The words hit me harder than they should have. For a moment, I wasn't sure how to respond. My heartbeat quickened, the sound loud in my ears, and I forced myself to look away, pretending to adjust the bag in my hand. But the truth was, I couldn't stop replaying her tone in my mind. The mix of warning, nostalgia, and something else I couldn't quite name. When I finally glanced back at her, she was still watching me, lips pressed together like she wished she hadn't said it. The silence stretched, full of questions neither of us dared to ask. It was nothing, a few words spoken in passing. But standing there on that quiet porch, her voice lingering in the air between us, I knew I'd never hear them the same way again. The house grew quiet that evening. My mom had gone to bed early, leaving the downstairs in a hush broken only by the occasional creak of old floorboards and the faint hum of the refrigerator. I wandered into the living room, expecting to be alone, but she was there, curled up on the couch, a blanket draped over her legs, a book resting in her lap. She looked up when I entered, her eyes catching the lamplight. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked, her voice low, almost conspiratorial, as if the silence of the night required softer words. "Yeah," I admitted, settling into the chair across from her. "Guess my brain doesn't shut off so easily anymore." She smiled faintly, closing the book but keeping a finger between the pages. "Tell me about it." For a moment, she just stared at the lamp's glow, her features thoughtful, her confidence dimmed into something gentler. Then, almost as if talking to herself, she added, "Some nights, it feels like the quiet only makes everything louder." I tilted my head, curious. "Like what?" She hesitated, then sighed, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Like the things you don't usually say out loud. Regrets, doubts. That little voice reminding you you're not quite where you thought you'd be by now." There was no trace of the polished, self-assured woman I'd always seen in her. In that moment, she looked almost fragile, not weak, but human in a way I hadn't expected. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. "That doesn't make you less. Everyone feels that way sometimes." Her eyes flicked to mine, studying me. I could tell she hadn't expected me to answer like that, with seriousness instead of humor. The corner of her mouth curved, not into a smile exactly, but something softer. "You've grown," she said quietly, as if realizing it for the first time. The silence stretched, heavy but not uncomfortable. I felt the weight of her gaze, the way it lingered on me as though she were reevaluating everything she thought she knew. She shifted, setting the book aside and tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "It's strange," she admitted. "I still think of you running around this house, getting into trouble. And now here you are, sitting across from me, looking at me like—" She stopped herself, the words hanging in the air. "Like what?" I asked gently. Her lips parted, then closed again. She shook her head, letting out a breathy laugh. "Never mind." But her eyes told me she hadn't meant to dismiss it. She was simply afraid of naming it. I wanted to cross the room, to sit beside her, to close the space between us, but I didn't. Instead, I offered the only thing I could in that moment: stillness and the promise that I was listening. And in that quiet living room, under the amber glow of the lamp, something shifted. She wasn't just my mom's friend anymore. She wasn't just a woman with a confident smile. She was someone carrying unspoken weight, and for reasons I didn't fully understand, she was letting me see it. The next evening, the air felt different. The summer heat had softened into a cooler night, and the house was quiet again. Too quiet for either of us to retreat to separate corners. She was on the back porch when I found her, wrapped in a light sweater, staring out at the darkened yard as if the shadows themselves carried secrets. "Mind if I join you?" I asked. She glanced over her shoulder, and though her smile was small, it was real. "Of course not." I sat down beside her, the old wooden bench creaking under our weight. At first, we talked about nothing important. The neighbors, the weather, some story my mom had told earlier that made us both laugh. But beneath every word was a rhythm I couldn't ignore. The way her voice dipped when she said my name, the way her eyes lingered just a little too long before sliding away. As the night deepened, the silence stretched between us again, heavier this time. I became aware of the small distance separating us. Just a few inches of wood between her sweater sleeve and my arm. It was nothing, and yet it was everything. Without realizing it, I shifted slightly closer. Our shoulders brushed, fabric against fabric, and the contact sent a spark through me. She didn't move away. In fact, she stayed perfectly still, as if testing how long she could bear the closeness. I glanced sideways. Her profile was soft in the dim porch light, her lips parted like she was caught between words and silence. For a moment, I thought she might actually say something. But instead, she exhaled slowly, shaking her head almost imperceptibly, as though arguing with herself. "You've grown into someone different," she said at last, her voice quiet, thoughtful. "It's strange seeing you like this." "Different how?" I asked, my words barely above a whisper. Her eyes flicked to mine, then away again. "Just not the boy I remember." The words hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. I wanted to ask her what she saw now, what she was afraid of admitting. But I didn't. I was afraid, too, of saying the wrong thing, of shattering the delicate thread holding us together. Instead, I let the silence speak. My shoulder stayed pressed against hers, steady and certain, even as her hand tightened on the edge of the bench. I could feel the tension rolling through her, not rejection, but restraint. A careful line she wasn't sure either of us should cross. The crickets sang in the grass. Car passed faintly down the street, and still neither of us moved. It wasn't a kiss or even a touch of hands. It was just the weight of her body next to mine, the shared warmth of two people sitting too close, both pretending it was nothing while knowing it meant everything. And in that fragile silence, I realized something. Sometimes the most powerful moments aren't in the things we do, but in the things we almost do. The night was quiet again, the kind of quiet where even the smallest sound seemed louder. My mom had long since gone upstairs, and I found myself alone in the living room, staring at the dim glow of the lamp. She appeared a moment later, padding softly into the room with a glass of water in her hand. "You're still awake?" she asked, her voice hushed, as though the silence itself was fragile. "Yeah," I said, managing a half-smile. "Guess I'm not much better at sleeping than you are." She chuckled under her breath, setting the glass down on the side table. Then, without asking, she sat beside me on the couch. The cushion dipped under her weight, and suddenly she was closer than she'd ever been. Close enough that the warmth of her arm seeped through the thin fabric of my sleeve. We didn't speak for a while. The ticking of the wall clock filled the space between us, each second stretching longer than the last. My chest tightened with everything I wanted to say but didn't dare. Finally, she broke the silence. "It's strange," she murmured, her eyes fixed on the lamp's glow. "I look at you and sometimes I still see the boy who used to sit on this floor playing with toy cars. But then you speak, or you look at me the way you do, and—" She stopped herself, shaking her head slightly. "And what?" I asked softly, leaning toward her. Her eyes flicked to mine, hesitant, conflicted. She swallowed, her voice barely audible. "And it reminds me that you're not a kid anymore." The words settled between us like a weight, heavier this time than when she'd spoken them before. My breath caught, and before I could second-guess myself, I reached out and placed my hand gently over hers. She stiffened at first, surprised, but she didn't pull away. Her hand was warm beneath mine, her pulse quick against her wrist. I kept my touch steady, not demanding, just there. A quiet acknowledgement of everything we hadn't said. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The air was thick with possibility, with restraint. Her eyes softened as she looked at me, something unguarded flickering in them. Not quite surrender, not quite refusal. "You shouldn't," she whispered, though her hand remained beneath mine. "Then tell me to stop," I said gently. Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she exhaled slowly, and her shoulders eased as if she had given up fighting herself. The silence spoke louder than anything else. Her hand stayed in mine, her fingers curling ever so slightly, like she'd decided to let go of the line she'd been holding onto so tightly. We didn't kiss. We didn't move closer. But in that moment, the brush of my hand over hers, the way she looked at me like she had finally allowed herself to see me, I knew we had already crossed into something we couldn't take back. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. The house was still. Even the old clock on the wall seemed to soften its ticking, as though it didn't want to intrude. We stayed there on the couch, her hand beneath mine, the silence pressing in around us. It should have been awkward, but it wasn't. Felt inevitable. She turned slightly, her eyes searching mine. There was hesitation there, yes, but also something deeper, something that looked like recognition. For the first time, she wasn't trying to hide behind casual laughter or polite small talk. She was just herself. I spoke quietly, not wanting to break whatever delicate thread held us together. "You know, I've never looked at you the way everyone else does." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, tinged with sadness. "I know. That's what scares me." I tightened my hand gently around hers. "It doesn't scare me." The words hung in the air, simple but weighted, and I watched as they sank into her. She looked down at our joined hands, then back up at me, her expression softening in a way that made my chest ache. "I shouldn't," she began, but the fight in her voice was gone. She leaned in slightly, just enough that I could feel her breath brush against my cheek. Then, as if she couldn't stop herself, she pressed a soft kiss against my face. Not rushed, not careless, but lingering. Long enough for me to feel her warmth, long enough to know it meant more than she was ready to admit. When she pulled back, her eyes glistened with something unspoken. "I don't know where this goes," she whispered, her voice unsteady. "I don't even know if it can go anywhere." I smiled faintly, my voice steady in contrast to hers. "That's okay. All I need to know is that tonight you saw me, not as a kid, not as your friend's son, but as me." Her throat tightened as she swallowed, the words catching in her chest. And then, with a small, almost reluctant laugh, she said, "I always did. I just wasn't ready to admit it." The weight of that confession settled over us, gentle and heavy all at once. She leaned against me then, resting her head lightly on my shoulder, as if she had been holding her breath for years and was finally ready to exhale. I sat perfectly still, not wanting to move, not wanting to risk losing the moment. The night stretched on, quiet and infinite, as the lamplight cast soft shadows across the room. I knew tomorrow might bring questions, maybe even complications. But tonight wasn't about that. Tonight was about recognition, about the simple truth that we both felt something we could no longer ignore. And as I sat there with her hand in mine, her head against my shoulder, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. She wasn't just my mom's friend anymore. She was the woman who had changed the way I looked at love. If this story touched you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more slow burn romances. Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what moments stayed with you the most.